This is a fun one. I always like to talk to you guys. I've been texting with Leo, and we have EXP, James Dwiggins, right, and a few other people, just going back and forth and saying, what are you guys seeing that I'm not? Help me, right? Because I do the same thing with you guys. I'm like, what am I not seeing, right? Where where are we at right now with what's happening with the lawsuits? And what do you think that opens up? Because I think people aren't looking longer term. And I think that what's happening right now, I think is going to be a challenge on the way homes are seen online and on the MLS. And that's a little scary. Scarier than what happened last year.
Yeah, lots going on. Well, so I went out in my garage. John Reilly will remember this. And I found this. This is probably one of the best mind-changing videos that I've ever seen. And it's called The Business of Paradigms by a guy named Joel Barker. And I first saw this, believe it or not, in 1989. And then I bought the license to show it at all my programs. And actually, the
Whoa.
video is gone, but and so I would, before I would start a program, I would show this because it opened people's minds to change. And that's where we got in this video. Joel Barker talks about the paradigm shift question. And a paradigm shift is a fundamental change in the way things happen. And
Okay.
so you have paradigm shifts where things were one day they were one way, and then not necessarily the next day, but the next day they're completely another way. So I would give examples of paradigm shifts. And so an example would be, what if they changed the NFL football field to 150 by 100? It would take different kinds of athletes. What if they changed the ball from the way it's shaped to round? That would change, right?
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
would have to adapt and change. So a paradigm is a model. It's the way things are done. And if you do things within the paradigm, you're usually successful. And if
Yeah.
you stray from the paradigm, you're not successful. But what happens if the paradigm changes or shifts? And so what Joel Barker says is when a paradigm shifts, everyone goes back to zero. Everyone goes back to zero. And so
Mm-hmm.
the question he asked is the fundamental paradigm shift question: what's currently impossible in your business? And if it were possible, it would fundamentally change the way you do business. And so people got to sit around and kind of brainstorm what's currently impossible. But if it were possible, it would fundamentally change the way I do business.
Yeah.
And then I added to it a reverse question: what's currently possible? And if it were impossible, it would fundamentally change the way you do business.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a good one.
Go.
Last year, it was possible to express compensation in an MLS. And our
Okay.
whole business was built around that. And now that's impossible.
Yes.
And so is that a paradigm shift? It is. It's a fundamental change. And a fundamental change is going to create opportunities. It's going to create hardships for some people. So
Yep.
in our industry, we have all these lawsuits that are changing the way we do business. And then we have business leaders and companies that are trying to adopt to the new paradigms. And so you mentioned, Tristan, a major brokerage firm in the country believes that limited exposure is a better deal for the seller. Now, I don't know that they necessarily believe that. Maybe they believe that limited exposure might play to a seller's advantage. Therefore, sellers should have the choice to limit their exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And we know who that is.
Yeah.
And so that's the compass idea. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have almost everybody else in the industry lining up to say what we've always believed, and that is that mandatory submission, the requirement that you expose your listing to as many people as possible, with some exceptions, that's better for everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty much the rest of the industry believes everybody should put it in the MLS because that gives more advantage to everybody. And then what happened was homes.com came out and said, we kind of agree that maybe, and this was in answer to Zillow.
Yeah, Zillow specifically, right?
Right.
They could care less what Compass and everybody else does.
You don't put your listings in the MLS, said Zillow, then we're going to ban it from Zillow forever, or at least until you list with another broker.
Yep.
And so that sounded like Zillow was coming out in favor of what we kind of believe, which is more exposure is better for everybody. And, it's like good for Zillow for kind of taking that stance. And we need more clarification on that. But then homes.com came out and said, well, if you get banned from Zillow, we'll boost your listing on homes.com.
I know. And look, I think it all stems from trying to remain relevant. And you see some companies and this is why it's going to change until the Department of Justice steps in, because NAR just doesn't have leadership right now to step in and say, this is it, guys. This is how we do it, like it or not. So it's going to end up being the Department of Justice stepping in and saying something. But until then, you have now Douglas Elliman is saying, hey, that's a good idea, Compass. We might do that, right? In fact, we are going to do that. You have Ryan Serhant, who's now going to do his own version of this type of network, right? And you have these smaller luxury brands doing the same thing, where you have the larger, like Anywhere, Keller Williams, Berkshire, these larger ones aren't going to do this. And at least they haven't said they were. They're saying, hey, we're going to go this route, where transparency on all listings at all times belong in the MLS, right? For the most part.
Yeah.
That I think comes down to who wants to own that data before it gets to the MLS. Who owns it? What do we do with it? Dude, John, what do you think about all this, man?
Yeah, who owns the first right to the data is the key critical question. As to what's happening with the portal wars, I know that my friends at the Department of Justice are certainly have an eye out for what it looks like the industry's not able to resolve all that's happening, and so it's interesting with some of the portal wars. Some of the things they say are accusing another portal of anti-competitive practice, which I know creates another interesting one. And you mentioned NAR, but there's also the real estate license law officials, like in Illinois, proposed a legislation mandating that the listings be placed on a public portal. This is under the licensing law. So everybody is trying to come up with a solution.
Their own version of something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one, John, where we saw this proposed law in Illinois that wants to mandate that your listing go into a public portal. And my first thought is define a public portal.
Right.
Right. Because an IDX site or an agent's IDX site, theoretically is a public, maybe it doesn't achieve the portal status, but it's definitely public display. Right. So, but that was an interesting thing. And so, you're right. The FTC and the DOJ are they've been looking for a while, and might they step in? Well, it's an opportune time. Homes.com actually invited them in, right? And said, come on in. We're looking for your help.
Here's the door.
Yeah.
Here's the door, everybody. Pay attention.
Come in. So it's like interesting to me because we're always very careful because of the code of ethics about demeaning our competition.
Yeah.
Right? Be careful what you say. Got to remember the code of ethics article, John. But to say disparaging things about your competitors. Well, you know what's happening right now is you got two sides. They're all saying disparaging things about one another.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like maybe there's a code of ethics violation here that none of us have really thought about because you got.
Interesting.
Yeah, it just kind of hit me that you've got that going on right now. So you've got, we believe that I know John does, I know you probably do as well, Tristan, that more people benefit when the property is exposed and everybody has a fair shot. If it starts going to siloing like it is in other parts of the world, you could end up with litigation against the listing broker at some point in the future, where somebody could probably make a case that they might have gotten more if they'd exposed the property to more people, and the broker talked them out of doing it. And it may be they signed something, but do they really understand it? Most agents don't even understand
No.
clear cooperation. So how are we going to explain this to consumers? And then if the consumer feels like they've been taken advantage of, or maybe they never feel that way, but some attorney will get a hold of them and say, have you sold a house recently? Did you get
Yep.
fair market value? Call us now. We have attorneys standing by to take your
Yeah,
call.
that's exactly what's going to happen, man. I think the thing we're missing, the thing that we're missing as an industry, is looking at the way that this is being sold. Like, I love Compass agents. I think they're amazing. I think the brand is amazing. I just think the way that they're approaching it, because how Redfin is pushing it, like this 3-phase process, right? That's their marketing plan. Number one is, we're going to, here are the benefits, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, of putting it outside, right? The days don't count. Nobody's counting days, right? And we're going to market to our own Compass agents, even though they've invited agents outside. Still, they're still primarily marketing to Compass agents, right?
You know, interesting that Compass just came up with a way to handle transparency with a book, right? And
Yeah, here's the book.
because they're transparent, they allow outside brokers to come to their office and take a look at the book of exclusive listings. That to them is transparency.
Yeah,
Well,
obviously
that's a step
that
backwards. So, in the years past, we were touting the idea of going from, we called it atoms to bits, right? So we're going from atoms to bits. We went from what we call the MLS book. John and I remember it well. We went from the MLS book to online. We went from atoms to bits. And now what we're doing, or what's being proposed, or what Compass is doing, is they're going from bits back to atoms.
Yeah. Dude, I think it's opening up a challenge it's opening up I think a problem for the industry, right? And I don't know that it has as a whole, our best interest at heart. Like, how could holding on, I'm explaining it this way. If Keller Williams decided to do this, and they have 160,000 agents, and if Anywhere decided to do this and function this way, how would that benefit the industry if every big brokerage did it this way? I don't know that the smaller brokerages would even last. Like,
It would make it more difficult, Tristan.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I could imagine scenarios, but I'll tell you, many years ago, there were communities in San Diego that didn't put their listings in the MLS. And so if you wanted to sell a property in some of these upscale neighborhoods, you had to figure out how to find out what was for sale. Well, what my partner and I did was we would buy the local rag where the brokers advertised their listings for sale. And we would know what was available by reading the newspaper, the local, and it would tell us what was for sale. And then we would call the office and we would talk to the listing agent. Yeah, it's for sale, but we don't offer any type of compensation. We don't belong to the multiple listings. When the MLS was an offer of compensation. So if you're going to get paid, you got to get the buyer to pay you. So we would have a contract with the buyer. We would find those properties.
Yep.
And then we would take people, and back in those days too, that in those areas, and probably the same for high cost areas, they didn't put lock boxes on the door. You had to go to the office and get a key. And then you could access the property with the key. And then when you were done showing the property, you'd take the key back to the office. Right. But we were able to sell real estate. And there were a couple of neighborhoods like that. And the listings weren't in the MLS. We found out what was available. Now, today with the port, what would happen if all of the big companies started isolating and siloing their data, the major portals would probably go cut deals with them to get their listings.
Yeah, that's what would happen.
And then somebody who's a small broker would then probably go to the portals and find out what's for sale. And then have a contract with the buyer, which you have to have anyway in California now. And according to the settlement, you got to have a touring agreement at least.
Mm-hmm.
So you get paid, right? You write it in the offer. So I'm thinking that however it sorts out, people are going to figure out how to do business.
Oh yeah, it's going to happen no matter what. The big question is, does the Department of Justice step in and saying, hey, this is something. What is it? Right? And they're going to determine what that is because they're already after us. Why are we giving them a bigger opportunity for them to come after us? Is it steering? Is it a lack of transparency? What does this look like on this end? What are the possible things that can happen?
Yeah, so the Department of Justice could step in and say, this is too confusing. You need to be regulated. We're going to turn this over to the Federal Trade Commission, the policemen, and we're going to let them figure out how to do this. Now,
yep.
Which is kind of interesting because that would be kind of the idea that all the data should be in the MLS, which makes the MLS strong. That's kind of the counter. That would be a counter position to the direction that DOJ has been taking. The DOJ has been doing things to kind of break up the MLS and break up the industry. So to now say, you know what? We see what you mean. It makes sense to have all the listings. It's more transparent. It's easier for buyers. It's easier for sellers. It's easier for listing agents, easier for buyer representatives, much easier, much better. The market's almost liquid. You guys were right. And so we're going to put rules in place to make sure that everybody puts their listings in the MLS so we don't have fair housing violations. We don't have exclusivity because exclusivity by its very nature excludes people. And we want them more open. So, hey, you guys were right all along. Now, I don't know that they'll take that position, but
I don't think so either.
But that's kind of like, that's the direction they would almost be forced into taking if they stepped into this current situation we have.
Well, you know, what's interesting with the DOJ is they recently added to their staff Roger Alford, who was the expert witness in the Sitzer-Burnett case. He now is working for the Department of Justice, and he has a total understanding of how the whole real estate industry works because of his background as a law professor at Notre Dame. So that's a little interesting twist.
Yeah, so we've got Illinois that's saying, you know, this idea of having to put your listing in the MLS within 24 hours, we think that's such a good idea. We're thinking about passing a law that makes you do that. Okay, well, that'd be interesting to watch. And then we got Compass that's saying, we think it's very important for people to have, sellers to have choice. It might turn out that it goes in the MLS anyway, but we've got reasons why seller choice makes sense. And to be totally transparent, we're going to create a book and it's going to be made out of paper, like the old book. And so that's what they're doing. And then we've got the big portals. We've got Zillow saying, if you don't put it in the MLS, then we're not going to let you put it on Zillow. Now imagine explaining that to a seller where it's held off the market and it doesn't sell. So the seller says, okay, let's put it on Zillow. And then the listing agent has to explain why it can't go on Zillow because it was excluded from the MLS. And then the seller might say, well, I didn't understand that. You didn't explain that well enough to me. And I want it on Zillow. So now what happens?
I mean, we all know what happens, man. But I think Chris makes a great statement. I think all of this, I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I'm going to say it. You guys can nod your head or not. NAR lacked leadership, man. That's what it come down to, because if they would have stepped in and said, this is how we are going to run it and how we're going to show up as an industry, we start then setting the right precedent for how every company should show up. And then if Compass does what they're doing, everyone can agree unanimously, hey, no, they're not actually working with us. They're working against us, right?
And you know who's really upset with NAR are the $2 billion brokerages, the ones who did not get coverage under the NAR settlement because of the revenues that they made. Those are the people that really feel that they got shafted by NAR, and some of them are even considering, backing away from NAR as a result, and then acting more independently. And they've got a huge number of real estate agents.
Well, so it's interesting because while not taking a firm position is not necessarily a good idea, but NAR is kind of like between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, they are.
They got to try to, they got this diverse membership, big companies, middle-sized companies, little companies, and they have to try to do things that satisfies everybody while the DOJ is breathing down their throat. And so, I think they kept kicking the can down the road.
Remember when we said that last year with CCP? We said that we're like, dude, they're kicking this thing too far.
Yeah.
The shit's going to go down and they're going to regret it. It happened right now. Now it's just too late. Now what do we do? Right. But where do you think we go from here? Because now Compass filed the lawsuit against the Northwest. Is it Northwest MLS?
Northwest.
Yeah. And what happens there? What's going, if Compass wins that one, what happens? Because that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, so that's interesting because it got so many different points, and while the winner is not necessarily right, whatever the winner might be, it might not be for the right reasons, right? So that's kind of a complex situation. It's a different kind of marketplace. That MLS is a private MLS, not an NAR MLS, and so you could have each side getting a little bit of what they want. So that's one for us to keep our eye on. Now I want to go back to we'll come back to this, but I want to go back to NAR for a second, because at the same time, first of all, I think that a lot of this is market driven. So as this turns into a more normal market, and maybe even a buyer's market, then people are going to want to put it in the MLS. They're going to want maximum exposure, right? So if I keep it out of the MLS, I don't get maximum exposure. I'm probably pushing more towards dual agency. A lot of people don't like dual agency. And if market time keeps increasing, it's harder and harder to sell a listing, then you might have sellers that insist that it go in the MLS and this thing could kind of level off, or we don't think it'll level off now.
So you think the market corrects what's going on its own? I think you might be right, man. I didn't think about that. I think the courts also don't favor dual agency. So that's crazy that they're putting that at the forefront of everything.
Yeah, isolating your listings, really more double ending. Now, we did some stats today at our MLS in 2023, because we were talking about concessions, right? Because the more concessions the seller is willing to make, probably the more motivated they are to sell the property. And so what we saw in 2023, 23.5% of our listings, the seller offered concessions, 23.5. In 2024, 25.1% offered concessions. And so far, year to date, 27.3% are offering concessions. So we're seeing the number of listings where agents are reporting the seller paid concession of some sort. That could be closing costs, that could be new roof, that could be any number of things. But when the seller is willing to make more concessions, that typically indicates they're having a little bit more trouble selling the property.
Yeah, I agree.
At the same time, we looked at average market time, and we saw that the average market time has gone up a couple days over the year. So maybe the market's softening a little bit. And that could be something that kind of straightens out what we have going on the MLS side. Now, back to NAR, I don't know if you saw the latest on, the big, beautiful tax bill that we're looking at, but real estate seems to be doing okay. They looks like so far they've saved 1031, and that 1031 is a critical critical benefit to people to be able to exchange your properties tax deferred. So it looks like they were good there. It looks like maybe the SALT, the sales and local tax limit's going to go up to maybe $30,000. That's a benefit. And so one of the things we missed, and I think it's really one of the strong points that comes from NAR, MLS is one thing, but so is legislative advocacy. And the things that NAR is able to accomplish for all of us on the legislative side that benefit not only us as real estate professionals, but also the consumer, the homeowner, and private property rights. And so maybe as we roll into the future with this, maybe we'll see more I'd love to see less emphasis on the MLS side and more emphasis on the legislative advocacy side. Let's let the marketplace work itself out, see wherever this goes. I'm a firm believer in MLS. Everybody should put their listings in the MLS.
Yep, I agree with that.
Exposure sells property. Let's get back to that liquid market. Every country in the world would love to have an MLS like we have, right? Where properties sell, it's almost liquid.
Yeah,
we've really got it. We're spoiled.
we are. John, what do you think?
Well, I tell you what my eye is on. My eye is on the new approach to the end-to-end digital transaction. We mentioned ICE before. We've been watching them for 2 years, but now there's a new emergence, right? With Rocket and Mr. Cooper and Redfin, they're talking about the end-to-end digital transaction. And just today I heard about John Berkowitz's Movoto was acquired by Lower, a mortgage, and they're focusing on the end-to-end digital transaction. That's what I've got my eyes on, because this is watching the entire journey from the start to the finish and beyond, because the financial institutions are going to want to have clients that stay with them for all aspects of the financial transaction. And I know Saul has an opinion too about with ICE and what they add to it as well with the hedge funds and stuff.
Can I really quick, because you brought up a really good point. I remember reading the Rocket Company's Redfin transaction investor presentation, right? So while we're over here going back and forth between brokerages and all that, you've got Rocket and ICE. I found it. This is their present. This is directly from Rocket, okay? And I'm pretty sure you guys all saw this. Rocket and Redfin, an integrated end-to-end ecosystem, is exactly what John was talking about. Home search, rental, real estate brokerage, home financing, title and closing, loan services. You know what they're not showing you in between? Everything else, because they want to own it. If they own everything, right? If they own the whole process, that means they can leave whoever they want out, and they can also take a piece of them. They're going to take a piece. Look what Zillow did. Zillow's already done this. And so this is why data becomes even more important. And point of contact. Hey, what's the inception point for the client? Redfin, they own it. What about servicing, Mr. Cooper, right? They already have the loan. So you see what Compass is doing is a play that protects them, right? Not the industry. And I think people forget that piece. This is how it all fits together. And so I thought that was important, John.
Yeah, no, so a big piece of this too is what makes home ownership possible to the degree that it's possible in the United States of America. And the answer is financing. The money's there. And so people think, well, I'm going to go out and get a loan. And you see, you don't go to the bank and get a loan. The loans are packaged and sold as securities in the secondary money market. And so what happens if they can be packaged and sold, it brings more capital back into the marketplace. We also have Fannie and Freddie Mac and Ginnie Mae. We've got these entities that buy loans. And why is it important that those loans are sold in the secondary market? It's important because that brings more capital back into the market so new loans can be made. And John's right, those loans have to be serviced along the way. And so companies are seeing this and have been seeing it for a number of years. And so as John said, yeah, the Redfin, Mr. Cooper acquisition, they needed a brokerage firm. You had that brokerage firm as Redfin. Also now you've got the feet on the street. You've got the loan, you got the packaging of the loan. And then we saw our good friend, our old friend, John Berkowitz and Ojo, right, that owned Movado.
Yep.
They're purchased by, so people are kind of positioning themselves for the future of the transaction. Now think of how antiquated the real estate transaction is. John talks about, the cradle to grave, how antiquated it takes so long. There's so many different players, and it takes, days to get loans. But what happens if we could go from days to minutes? Loans and minutes instead of days. Now you think about this, if you've ever traded stock online, so you can go to Ameritrade or Charles Schwab, you can find the stock you're interested in, you can push the button and you can buy it now, immediately, right? And a lot of people, and there's no charge to do it. And what happens is when you buy a piece of stock, don't you think there has to be a stock transfer? There has to be documents that indicate that the old entity that owned it doesn't own it anymore, and you just bought it, so you own it. Think about all of the steps that used to be required to have a stock transfer take place. And you could actually then get the stock certificate sent to you, or you could have your broker hold the stock certificate, kind of like a deed or a title. But now it's all done instantaneously. It's just done automatically online. I did it today. I went to where my 401k is. I decided I wanted to, I did this the other day, buy some NVDA, some NVIDIA stock, right? And so I went and boom, bought it just like that. In an instant, money's there. There is no more waiting for the documents to get the stock certificate. Now, kind of think about real estate and the deeds and the title. What if all of that could happen in minutes, because it all can happen on an online platform? And by the way, those online platforms already been built, and the players are lining up. And take a company like ICE, they don't really care. They do, but I'm going to say this. They don't really care who makes the loan, because once the loan's made, they're going to package it up. They're going to create mortgage-backed securities. They're going to be able to offer those in the secondary market. Remember, ICE owns the New York Stock Exchange and like 13 other exchanges. They're in the business of selling securities or providing the facility for the sale of securities. So there are big players getting involved. Now, it just made me think of something else, and that is this dual licensing idea. And that is, you might see more dual licensing, where somebody who sells real estate might also want to place the loan. And people say, oh, stay in your lane and all this other stuff. Well, you know what? When a paradigm shifts, remember we talked about paradigms?
Yeah.
When a paradigm shifts, everyone goes back to zero. Your past success guarantees nothing when a paradigm shifts. As a matter of fact, often your past success blinds you from seeing the new paradigm. And so don't bother me with these new ideas about the way things. I'm really good at doing it the way I do it. And so it's always going to be done the way that I do it. And some people can't see beyond their own paradigm. And this is all, we're going through a transition right now. The industry is changing dramatically, but that means there's opportunity. And that's what people need to be looking for. And you need to be upbeat about this, and you need to see this as opportunity. When I sold real estate many years ago, I saw the big players getting into the industry, and I felt like I was going to get locked out. So I got other licenses. People tell me that dual licensing doesn't work. I don't believe it, because I got a Series 7 and a Series 24 and a Series 63 security license. So I could sell stocks and bonds and mutual funds and real estate and have a property management company. I became a certified financial planner, so I could offer people financial advice, so that I could not only sell them a house, but I could help them fund their retirement plans. I got a life and disability insurance license, so I could refer that business off to insurance agents that knew the product and could sell the product, and I could get paid. I created a tax business so I could do people's taxes. So when I was done doing their taxes, they go, holy cow, I can't believe I'm paying this much in tax. How do I reduce my taxes? And I would say, well, come back in June, we'll go out and buy some investment real estate. And then we'd sell them investment real estate, and we would manage the property until it came time to sell the property because the equity is there. And we do a 1031 tax deferred exchange into something else. So when people tell me you can't be dual licensed, I say baloney. You can be. And so,
I mean, dude, you have to be. You have to be in the world that we're heading into. Look at this slide on their deck that from Rocket 3, 4, 5 days ago. Okay. 5 days ago. Home buying is complicated and stressful and expensive. Look at the number. They go out of their way to show how much it costs, because the next thing they're going to solve for is simplifying the process to remove a big chunk of the commission. That's what they're going to solve for. So what Saul is saying, it's like, hey, why don't we get ahead of this? What are the opportunities for us where we can win? And I'll drop this one out for you too, guys. But if this is what Rocket is openly saying, what is Zillow saying behind closed doors? What is Compass saying behind closed doors? What are all these companies saying behind closed doors that are not being told to us, but are being insinuated by their actions? Like, listen to what they mean, not what they say. We're lucky that Rocket is giving us their whole outline.
well, you know what? And ICE has done the same thing. If you go to icemortgage.com, you can see a lot of this. And so, the change doesn't happen all at once. That's another thing people don't realize.
That's true.
It's not like John and I joke about, you're not an overnight success. It takes about 25 years to become an overnight success, right? And
It's
so,
pretty good.
yeah. So change kind of bubbles along, and it changes and it changes and it changes and it changes. And all of a sudden, it's not all of a sudden, there's enough change that it manifests itself, and all of the change that's taken place becomes visible. But the fact is, it's been changing for years. And it just got to John and I also call this connecting the dots. And so if you pay close enough attention, you can connect the dots before other people connect the dots.
Yeah.
And that's where opportunity resides.
That's it. I mean, they're already connecting the dots for us, right? So now it's going to take some time to build it, especially now that what John said, like who bought Ojo Labs? Lower, just yeah.
Lower.
Everyone that is part of that world, right? ICE, Lower, Rocket, Zillow, Homes, and whoever else, they're all lining up to do the exact same thing. They're telling us where we're going. It's just going to take some time. Let's plan ahead, everyone.
Yeah. And we used to joke about this. How many buggy whip manufacturers are still around?
Dude, one.
How many anvil makers are still around?
That's a good question. I don't know.
How many switchboard operators are there? And so people's professions, over the years, things change. And so to believe that we're going to continue to list and sell real estate the way we do, I think is not, you're not being perceptive enough about the changes taking place. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be out of business, out of a job. It means that things change and we have to adapt.
That's it. That's it, guys. All right. I love this one. We'll do it again in about 2 weeks. We'll see where we're at, what new thing has transpired. Maybe we'll be in the same spot, which I doubt. But thank you for your insight. John, Saul, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ryan, we have a YouTube channel. It's the update on YouTube. Just type in the update, Saul, John, and Tristan, and it'll pop up there. And if you have time to read, like good time and take notes, John and Saul have this great blog called the Data Advocate. I would probably go in there and spend some time and digest everything. That's how I learn a lot of the things that we're talking about. I read a lot of what John sends me, and I have to reread it. I have to input it into ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, can you say all this like if I'm a fifth grader? And then it summarizes it for me. And then I come on here and I'm like, I sound smart. So you can thank John and Saul and ChatGPT for that. There you go.
Hey,
Thanks,
somebody asked for my email address. It's
Oh, what is it, buddy?
Saul@saulklein.com.
Saul Klein.
.com.
I'll type it in there so people can grab it. There you go. Saul@saulklein.com. John, thank you for making me look smarter. Saul, thank you for all the info. Everybody else, thanks for jumping in.
Hey, good to see you again, Tristan. Take care. John Reilly,
Aloha.
talk to you later.
Aloha.